give me your roster construction if you have 20 roster spots in a best ball league.
Assuming you have to start a defense but not a kicker, I want a minimum of 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends, and 2 defenses. Whether I draft 3 of any of those positions, or maybe even 4 in some really odd circumstances, will depend on the quality of the players that I have as my first and second options at that position. It's obviously more risky to go with 2 quarterbacks or 2 tight ends because you lose one for the season and you're automatically taking a 0 on somebody's bye week. I think it probably makes sense with the extra week added to maybe add a couple roster spots in best ball leagues. But the thing is, like, mostly you want to have a bunch of running backs and wide receivers. I don't mind, like, one of my favorite values in the late rounds is Taysom Hill. He's a guy who his current ADP suggests he's available in the last round of best ball drafts. He's a guy who I would break my rule and possibly draft a 4th quarterback, because if I think he's worth the last round pick if Jameis Winston had already been named a starter, because of Jameis Winston's track record of getting benched at certain points during seasons. Like, it's a possibility. And the combination of that and Taysom Hill's upside if he's the starter. Like, I hate watching Taysom Hill play quarterback for everybody else, but for him, he's got top 5 upside.
And I mean, if you even beyond that, like, there's at least an outside chance that there might be 1 week during the season, even if he's not starting, where he just happens to score 2 touchdowns and gets like 60 yards and might actually be better than one of your quarterbacks. I think Taysom Hill in best ball, with not even your last round pick, you should definitely reach a couple rounds for him at least to make sure you get him. I think he's a tremendous player for that format.
Heath, does anything change from best ball to just a regular redraft in terms of how you value the elite tight ends or the elite quarterbacks? Or does that kind of strategy change?
I think that is certainly up for debate. I've heard compelling arguments on both sides of that. For me, it really, like, I'm probably more likely to take one of the elite tight ends or elite quarterbacks because I like the flexibility that gives me, especially at quarterback, where you don't have to worry about injury quite as much if you're not drafting Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. It gives you the flexibility of being able to draft an extra running back or wide receiver because you don't anticipate needing a 3rd quarterback.
How does do you think 0 RB is more or less viable in best ball?
It's more fun because you can, like, and I think it's a little bit more viable as well because, like, you can take both Devin Singletary and Zach Moss in round 11 and round 12 right now, or 10 and 11 right now based on ADP. And you don't have to decide which one of those guys you're going to start.
Heath, are these 10-team leagues or 12-team leagues?
12-team.
Okay.
So I think it's slightly more viable. The problem is, like, some of my favorite values in the first 5 rounds are running backs, and there are so many wide receivers. Like, it's actually probably a little bit easier to do either 0 running back or 0 wide receiver, which is why I end up with more Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, George Kittles in the early rounds.
Yeah, because one thing I'm thinking is that, historically over the last 5 years or so, but also in the longer term, elite wide receivers have less game-to-game predictability than elite running backs. And so I'm just curious how that impacts what type of strategy is best, and whether, even if they score the same amount of points, is an elite wide receiver more valuable than an elite running back in this format, or vice versa. I would guess it's the elite running back, just because there are more games where they're likely to be in your score,
right,
than the elite wide receivers, but the elite wide receivers' biggest scores will likely be higher.
Right. Well, and there are a lot more wide receivers in that wide receiver 3 range that are going to have big games, like, without an injury. They're just going to have, like, Deshaun Jackson and guys like that when he plays.
There are probably 55 wide receiver 3s in the NFL right now in terms, like, for fantasy.
Well, my thought was to not gamble too much on a 0 RB just based on my best ball league last year. I had Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders, and I loved it.
You said the word gamble, and this, like, it's key I talked about at the beginning, there's so many different, even within just best ball 10s, there's a difference between whether you're playing a winner take all or a top 3 or a 50-50. Yeah. In a 50-50, I don't want to gamble much at all because all I have to do is finish in the top half of the league. If you're playing in a winner take all, then I do not care at all about what my floor is. Right, if I don't finish first, it's over.
But I think the zero RB strategy in a regular redraft league is sort of based on, well, I'll just use the waiver wire at points and pick up the injury replacements. And you can't do that in best ball.
No, you need to draft them.
Yeah. Can you draft them, or is it just too hard to predict who those guys are going to be?
It is a little bit hard to predict, but you got an extra 5 rounds compared to a CBS draft, and in some formats you have even more rounds, so you just draft more of them. Like if I'm going zero RB, I might end up with 8 running backs drafted in the double-digit rounds or after round 7.
Okay. Let's keep going here. So handcuff running backs like a Tony Pollard more valuable in this format, or no?
Yeah. Yes, in terms of drafting, because you're not going to have the opportunity to add those guys off the waiver wire. Like there's a chance somebody drafts Tony Pollard and drops him by week 4.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Your favorite early values. So you mentioned earlier, but who are the other ones that you really like early?
Yeah, just going in order. Joe Mixon, currently RB12 at the end of round 2. And I think every single year that I've worked at CBS said Joe Mixon was not going to be worth a first round pick where he was being drafted. This might be the year he's worth a first round pick, and now he's going at the end of round 2.
Yep. Heath and I are in total agreement on that. I agree for redraft. He's like 15 in NFC ADP since May 1st, I think.
Lamar Jackson is the number 4 quarterback at the end of the 4th round. He's my number 2 quarterback. Another one of those guys that I think is like, he obviously has the enormous upside on a week-to-week basis. We saw that at the end of the year when he was running for 100 yards and a touchdown every single week. But also, like, his down year last year, he averaged 25 fantasy points per game. Almost everyone else, that's like their career year, a fantastic year. So I love Lamar Jackson, especially behind Murray and Allen. No one will be surprised to hear me say Josh Jacobs in round 5, but also Chris Carson is going after Josh Jacobs later in round 5, and then Cooper Kupp.
Yeah. Wow. Carson. He's basically per game top 15 3 years in a row. So that's what you need to know. And he's RB21 in ADP. And your favorite late round values?
Usually he's one at a time, or just all 5 of them?
What you did was good, and we'll come back to him.
Jalen, Waddle, and Terrace Marshall are a pair of rookie wide receivers who I think will be better in best ball than they are in redraft. And I have them ranked higher in redraft than they're being drafted in best ball. So I think they are fantastic. Like, the problem with Waddle is we don't know how long it will take before he's the number 1 wide receiver, or one of Fuller or Parker gets hurt. It may not matter, but I love Waddle at wide receiver 48. I like Terrace Marshall even more at wide receiver 70 in round 16. I mentioned Devin Singletary at the beginning of round 12. T.Y. Hilton is currently wide receiver 56 at the end of round 12. He finished as wide receiver 42 in a disaster of a year last year. Now, if he does that again this year, you won't be happy drafting him in round 13, but I think that was closer to what his floor is this year than his ceiling, as long as they don't sign Julio. And then, of course, Taysom Hill.
Do you know off the top of your head if Michael Pittman is going ahead of T.Y. Hilton in these drafts?
Like 40 picks ahead of.
Oh, wow.
I think he's at pick 100.
They keep going in our redraft drafts, our mocks. I feel like they're going pretty similarly. It's
way, way, way more fun to draft Michael Pittman than T.Y. Hilton. And it might end up being the right decision. Like, it feels, well, unless you went to FIU.
Yeah, exactly.
It's more fun to draft T.Y. Hilton.
Yeah. But even in redraft, in NFC, T.Y. Hilton's going 40 picks later than Michael Pittman.
What? Wow.
Overall, yeah.
No, I mean, I'm leaning Pittman. There's basically 2 or 3 games last year to go off of. The Pittman was good, but I lean Pittman over Hilton.
I mean,
but not at 40 picks earlier. To me, they're like back to back.
The argument for Pittman is he stepped on the field as a rookie and basically played every snap. The argument against him is he stepped on the field as a rookie and played every snap and wasn't really all that productive.
Paris Campbell, best Colts wide receiver?
Unlikely. And it's also possible that none of them are good.
Heath, it is possible. Any final thoughts on best ball?
I hear people like poo-pooing it because it's not, you don't have to set your lineup. It's not real fantasy football. It's just a different type of fantasy football. And I think if you play in a league like that, you will find that it's also fun. It doesn't have to take away any of your teams. I've basically made the rule, like, I've got 17 teams. I can't add any more real teams and still be a dad and stay married. So this is the way that I'm able to add more teams, do more drafts, have more fun. It's not something to replace regular fantasy. It's a supplement.
Did you see the video on Twitter that was going around yesterday of the guy like chopping a tree with a dull axe and like, oh, we out here grinding, putting in the work. I'm built different. That's the same thing with like people who hate best ball. Is like if you're not grinding 37 waiver wire leagues, you're not really a fantasy football player. And it's like, no, it's okay to like do things that aren't hard work sometimes.
Yeah, I find that even if I join a league, I'm not really excited about the format. I end up liking it because it's fantasy football.